Hey everybody, Zibboyeye here, and the irony of this video is not lost on me. Coming soon after Sony announced they are making PlayStation discs kaput and coming out with a video about how I let go of most of my physical retro media is ill-timed at best. But retro gaming was such a huge part of my life that I couldn't not talk about it as a way of memorializing it, so to speak. But first off, I want to ask, has this ever happened to you, whether it be in collecting or some other sphere? Have you ever loved something so much and said to yourself, you're never gonna part with it, only for times to change? Whether it was voluntary, like you moved on from it, or you felt like you had to get rid of it for some ultimate goal, tell me in the comments, I'd love to hear. The collector bug bit me early. I'd say when I was around 8 years old, I got really into collecting video game action figures.
They even got the blue eye thing right here. Perfect. This really shows how good this is. They even have the brown part at the bottom of the shoe. Genius, genius, genius.
A little after that, I got really into collecting retro video games. I'd say I got into collecting older consoles around 2009 or 10. I think it started with the SNES. What got me interested in these consoles and even video game action figures years prior was the YouTube presence that was encroaching on the internet. People who grew up in the 80s were reaching their 20s at this time and picked up YouTube as a hobby, talking about the video games they grew up, and as a kid, I thought these video games looked really cool. Or maybe that was just the passion and nostalgia emanating from the computer screen. Either way, I wanted a part of it. I was a big Nintendo fan at the time, and Nintendo had a rich history, so of course I wanted to play some of their earlier games. The Super Nintendo is where it started for me. Even just off camera, I still have some of the games from back then. My mom is also one to patron garage sales, so I think some of the cartridges came in through that, but most of them came through the flea market. I remember going through the flea market. It was an outdoor one, and it was exciting. A lot of the stuff I didn't care about, but there were some cool stuff. Like one image I remember in my mind was this CRT at one booth playing a classic video game that I loved as a kid and still love today, Sonic Adventure DX. Even if there wasn't always something I bought, I found it neat to see that enthusiasm for gaming as a kid. But there was one that I distinctly remember that was a little bit of an indoor booth filled to the brim with video game plushies and, of course, old video games. And this is the first reason why retro gaming fell off for me compared to back then. Back then, you could go into a flea market and pick up an affordable old game. Now some of them are so rare, and sellers are more savvy now, it's harder to get a good deal on a video game. But back then, prices were way more fair. I remember one of my first retro purchases from this guy was a Sega Genesis, specifically a Sega Genesis Mark II. I was super big on Sonic the Hedgehog back in the day, so I got into Sega because of that. There was also something about being a Nintendo fan that made me want to be an anti-Nintendo fan. I know that's weird, but Sega as their rival felt like an underdog story. They felt cool. Also, because Sega's hardware went the way of the dodo, Sega as a hardware company, and their consoles by that proxy, represented retro gaming as a whole to me. You can't waltz into a GameStop and pick up a Dreamcast 2 as much as I wish we lived in that world. Sega was the icon of this retro gaming fixation for me.
Vector Man 1 and Vector Man 2.
And boy did I collect, from Genesis to Saturn, even though I could hardly get any Saturn games because even back then they were rare. Oh boy, now. And my favorite, one of my favorite consoles ever.
Sega Dreamcast. It's thinking.
Now things like Sonic Adventure 2 or Shenmue or Jet Set Radio have had HD remasters, but back then those hadn't come out yet. so this was one of the only ways to play those older titles. That's another reason why collecting the classics fell off for me. Back then, there was more of a necessity for these consoles in order to play those titles. Now, with things like the Sega Genesis Classics, and yeah, I know, again ironic considering this too has been delisted, and you may argue, oh, it's emulation. Some people don't like that, but this is good enough for me. This is more convenient to play on modern day than getting out my older console. But convenience or not, and even though I needed those old consoles to play those games, it still was the love of old games. That hasn't changed with me. I love popping in Jet Set Radio as much as I love pulling it up on Steam. Convenience or not, I loved these things, to the point that my Sega hype went as far as to get a Sega CD and Sega 32X. Yes, the Tower of Power. Which is another thing at the time that was a mere hiccup, but now is more of a bother. I do remember getting a non-working Sega 32X that I had to return. That is an of course downside with old video game collecting. But I did get one that worked eventually, and having that felt like a shrine to my beloved Sega. But it didn't stop there. I feel like with collecting, maybe just life in general, there's always something else you want. And my affection evolved into wanting perfection, the perfect visuals. I started to get really into graphics quality around 13 or 14. I know that's ironic with older consoles, but if you know, you know. Stuff like getting a VGA box for the Sega Dreamcast, or importing SCART cables for the Saturn from Europe, because SCART is this super crisp quality between composite and component that never made it to America, but it's really good, so I had to get the SCART cables. But of course it wouldn't work on my TV, so I had to get SCART to HDMI for it to play on an American TV, and oh boy. I'm a teenager at the time asking my parents for these cables, and they get it for me on my birthday and stuff, and they look at the game and can't tell the difference, but I'm there saying, oh yeah, it's sharper, and they don't understand it. But as you grow, interests develop, and my interests developed away from playing some of these older games. I still had them there, but they were mostly collecting dust at this time, around between at least 17 years old onward. As my usage is decreasing, the prices of these games are increasing, reaching notable heights around 2020. That's one of the big reasons I gave it up. It's not an affordable hobby anymore. Long gone are the days you can go into a flea market and leave with 4 games completely in box from the 90s for a reasonable price. I think the nail in the coffin moment for me was when I saw prices for Super Mario Sunshine. I grew up with the GameCube, so I was a bit reluctant to admit, yeah, it's retro back then, but it's retro. This was around 2020, maybe 2021, but I saw that people were asking $90 for Super Mario Sunshine. Supply and demand is economics. It's no different for collecting. You understand as a collector when supply is low, it's rare. You know you're going to pay a higher premium. But Mario Sunshine is not a rare game by any standards. This is a game for GameCube. This is the game for GameCube. This is a game that everyone who had a GameCube probably had. It's common as dirt. Why is it being charged for $90? This is where the more savvy sellers come in. They know that Mario Sunshine is the GameCube game. If you want a GameCube, and Nintendo fans seem to be some of the biggest gaming fanatics, and if you're one of those, you're gonna want a GameCube. And if you want a GameCube, you're gonna want Super Mario Sunshine. So they charge an absurdly high price for it. I know there are more egregious examples for absurdly priced retro games, but reminder, common as dirt. I'm not sure how much it varies per console and how much time plays into this story, but I remember at one point a friend told me about how they went into a game shop and saw Super Mario Bros. For NES really affordable. that doesn't apply to the same rules that these resellers use now, where they know you're going to want the Mario game and charge exorbitant prices for it. And they asked the clerk why it was so affordable, and they said, if you're going to buy an NES, you're going to want Super Mario Bros. This is easy and comfortable to sell at this price. So how come it's not that way for Super Mario Sunshine? And that's the thing, if I sell a game, I'm not going to be a goody two-shoes about it and analyze what its right price should be. I'm gonna be tempted by more money and charge it by the going price. But I feel like that going price isn't accurately derived from rarity and value, it's derived from gouging the demand from the consumer. Since this is a hot collecting market, when someone charges a certain price for it, it's hard not for others to want to charge that same thing for it. These things go at a frequent pace, so of course as a reseller you're going to want assured and more money. So in short, I feel like the value from these games aren't accurately reflected in their prices. I feel like it's an artificial price increase from the market, and because it's a hot collector's market, likely the speculative market at play of people buying these up hoping to resell later. So cut to about a year ago, and I need money, and I need my collection less. I just looked at it and I've taken it for granted over the years. As time went on, this stuff was just there. I was a huge Sega fanboy when I was younger, and as a fanboy, Sega was a huge part of my identity. But I looked at this stuff now and it didn't make me as happy as it did when I was younger. That's not really a bad thing. People change and their passions change. It's only hardest when you don't know where to go from there. I was lucky because, look at this, I have movies. It brings me so much joy seeing directors like Takashi Miike, yeah, I don't organize alphabetically, seeing stuff like Takashi Miike's work back to back in a row. My love for this didn't die, it merely evolved. But the flames of my old passion were stoked again when I was reselling some of this stuff. Like, I went through the process of selling my Sega Tower of Power, the Genesis, the Sega CD, and 32X. A complete hassle to set up. They take 3 AC adapters to power, and it's just a mess of wires, completely inconvenient. You could look at it as one of the worst things retro gaming has to offer. But in setting it up to make sure it works for me to sell it, I rekindled a bit of that love. I remembered what it felt like plugging this in, playing with the old controller in your hands, feeling like I was in the 90s in a time I never got to live.
Food.
Setting it up and popping in my cartridge of Knuckles Chaotix, I remembered what it was like. I was still fine saying goodbye, but if you forgive me for waxing poetic even more, it was like seeing an old friend. And that's the cycle of collecting. I loved this at one point, but as time went on, my interest waned. I moved on, and it's time to move these pieces of media on to someone else who loves it. There's no point in collecting if you aren't collecting what you love. I'm fine selling a lot of my older games because it makes space for more of the stuff I do love. So there I am, selling these games and making some dough, and in the back of my head I have a certain purchase in mind. I'm not gonna blow all of it on it, but I had something that I wanted, and I'll show it coming up at the end of the video. The most expensive piece from my collection was a set of 5, new in box, complete with the cellophane wrap, Pokemon games from Game Boy and Game Boy Color. And you know what? I didn't care for them. I didn't set them on display anywhere. They were just in a box next to my camera. Yeah, for a lot of the videos I've been filming, there's just raw gold to collectors next to me and the camera. Selling it is a bit of a story too, because I priced it a bit low and managed to talk the buyer into spending the right price that these deserved. And I'm not going to discuss that price. I feel it's tacky to bring in money into this video, even though I've alluded to it. But if you know these products, you can guess. And how did I come to acquire this? Back to the flea market days. Yeah, I got 5 new in-box Pokemon games. Technically 6. I had Pokemon Pinball 2, I think, but I sold that separately. So back then you could get 6 new in-box Pokemon games from one place, and I was just a kid. So my mom, who knows what she spent? She's not gonna spend a lot on a kid at a flea market. Maybe 100, maybe 80, and from a little acorn does a big tree grow. So now that I had some liquidity, what was that big purchase that I wanted to make? A stuffed animal. If you watched one of my videos last year, and definitely if you follow me on socials, you know this is Cornel from Cornel and Bernie, aka Watch My Chops. Cornel never got a plushie before, so what am I holding in my hand? Well, you can probably tell, but I have a full-on autistic obsession with this character, and I wanted something to hold. So I paid a craftsman who goes by MDK Aridus to make a plush for me, and I love him. I've thought about making a video about this and interviewing the guy and discussing my relationship to characters, and if you want to see that, tell me below. I can't think of a better embodiment for the message of this video. I loved collecting retro games and it fell out for me, but that doesn't mean you stop loving things. I let it go and I embraced a love for something else, as silly and quirky as that is. Many people think of collecting as holding on to things, and yeah, I can't say they're wrong, but it's also healthy to let things go. That's the cycle of collecting. Out with the old and in with the new, and what goes out will be someone else's new. It will make them happy, and hopefully you embrace the new in your life that makes you happy. So I'll ask again, have you ever parted with something you once loved? Have you ever moved on from collecting one thing to another? Tell me in the comments below. But either way, thank you so much for watching this video. I always appreciate it, and any video you watch of mine. But anyways, take care and I'll see you next time. Watch my chops!
Thank you for watching this. Rate, subscribe. If you really want to subscribe, I don't care if you don't, it's your decision, but